is my city, Delhi. And while many like me love it, despite everything, it is still changing. Hello and welcome. I'm Sadhika Tiwari and you're watching Eco India. And I'm sure, much like my city, your city is changing as well. Some of these changes we might like, while the others not so much. Some of these changes are a choice, while the others are forced by factors like climate change, which are making our cities increasingly unlivable. India's total solar capacity is currently over 70,000 megawatts. And while this is scattered across different cities and villages across several states in the country, so far there has been no city in India that has been entirely solar. But not anymore. A 3 megawatt plant in India's historic city of Sanchi in the centermost state of Madhya Pradesh is changing this.
Sanchi, in Madhya Pradesh, is first and foremost famous for its Buddhist stupas, which make it a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But now, Sanchi has another claim to fame. It's India's first solar city. It draws all its electricity from a 3 megawatt solar plant, which cost the central government the equivalent of some 2 million euros. In addition, the town is equipped with solar-powered e-charging stations, water kiosks, solar streetlights, and nearly 24 rooftop solar systems. One of these is being installed on Rataram Sarate's roof. He's retired and welcomes the chance to save money.
I was told that it would produce 3 kilowatt of energy. That's roughly 15 units per day. I only use 5 to 10 units per day. I thought I would give the rest to the central grid. So I'll recoup the costs.
He gets to save 500 rupees, that's about 6 euros a month. He's halved his electricity bills. The Solar City project is based on a private-public partnership model and will reduce CO2 emissions by some 14,000 tons per year. All the public buildings in Sanchi, which has a population of 8,000, now have rooftop solar panels. Other states are lagging behind in comparison.
In a big state like Uttar Pradesh, the installed rooftop solar capacity in 2022 was only about 260 megawatts against a target of 4,300 megawatts by 2020. Even though we do have subsidies and incentives available, say under the National Solar Program, but targeting those in the right manner and investing in raising the consumer awareness levels and making them understand the benefits of going for a particular solution is something that is key.
As a designated solar city, Sanchi is a showcase project and is a pioneer in renewable energy use. But the general public still has a lot to learn about solar technology. Rataram Sarate has many questions about his new solar unit.
They should at least tell us how to clean it and maintain it and how often. We are supposed to clean it with water, but they didn't tell us how or when. Look how much dust has settled on it.
2 years ago, the government launched an educational program in conjunction with the Solar City project. The public is taught about the importance of saving energy, the role of renewable energies, and also about their economic benefits.
And the idea is that all the individuals are to be made aware of how to minimize your consumption. And is there any way in which you can use equipments, you can design your houses, you can design your toilets in which you have a least of consumption of energy.
PhD student and part-time store owner Vikas Tomar took part in the outreach program. But he's not convinced that an online training is the best way to get locals on board.
The form was easy, but it was an online process. So some people face difficulties. Even though most people are well versed with online processes these days, people in villages and rural areas aren't. If it had taken place offline, more people could have enrolled.
Teaching people about renewable energy, getting them to change their habits, and transforming a town the size of Sanchi clearly can't happen overnight. Bihari Lal Sen drives a solar-powered three-wheeler. For him, switching to an e-vehicle made sense because it saves him money.
उसमें 50% का फायदा है.
There's a 50% benefit. The solar run batteries are much more efficient than diesel.
डीजल की खपत ज़्यादा होती है.
2 solar-powered charging stations were set up in Sachi in July. For the time being, the charging infrastructure is only rudimentary and few people here have made the switch to electric vehicles. But experts understand the challenges and are keeping sight of the bigger picture.
Any transition, of course, will not be a linear process. A country as huge as India, as you said, the entire country as a whole transitioning through each stage, different sectors, states, sections of society will transition at different paces. So while power sector transition that is at relatively more advanced stages, the mobility and the industrial sustainability transition is still unfolding.
In Sachi, the mood is optimistic. Now that it has its solar city status, it's looking to move away from fossil fuels across every sector of the economy and become a net zero city, starting with a 5 megawatt solar plant that will mainly supply the agricultural sector.
We are not resting on to only the present consumption, but we are also looking at replacing the complete agricultural consumption also. Because in long run, we are looking for a net zero city. So this is not the first that we want to be declared as solar city, but we want to make it first net zero city in the world.
As the country's first solar city, Sachi can lead the way for other places in India and also point out the main difficulties. And of course, transferring the project to a larger city will be a challenge in itself.
Colorful homes, beautiful castles, gardens, and water surrounding all of this. Which city are you thinking of? Well, if you look up the capital of Denmark on the internet, these images will pop up. Looks beautiful, right? Pretty perfect. Why would anyone want to change any of this? Well, here's why.
On the 2nd of July 2011, this is what Copenhagen looked like. Dead rats floated in the stormwater after a once-in-a-thousand-year kind of rain. A quarter of the sanitation workers fell sick in the aftermath, and one even died of a blood infection. But it didn't stop there. In 4 out of the last 6 years, the city has seen abnormal cloud bursts that its conventional stormwater system can't deal with. News from around the world is full of similar stories, and it's getting worse. Copenhagen is leading several cities around the world that are getting a redesign. As climate change is making rainfall less predictable and more intense. Some plans are brave, like designing playgrounds to flood. I went deep into the heart of Copenhagen to find out. How exactly do you flood-proof a city of this scale? If I was here 5 years ago, this tree would not have been here. But instead, there may have been an SUV stuck in congested traffic. This square is one of around 300 spots in Copenhagen chosen for a makeover. It used to be a busy roundabout that has now become a wooded area in the middle of the city. It's one part of the plan to turn Copenhagen into a kind of giant sponge for the next 100 years, after the devastating 2011 flood. It's here that I met Jan Rasmussen, the head of the city's cloudburst management plan, who told me that day was a real wake-up call.
Politicians, they decided at that time there's really a need for getting the water out of the city very fast. They asked for a plan how to do this in a clever way. Could we expand the sewer system, or could we do it in a more clever way maybe? Could we handle rainwater at the surface and at the same time make it a synergy with the wish for a more green city, more biodiversity in the city, more meeting place in the city?
So Jan's team worked to turn this roundabout into what it calls the green component of the cloudburst management plan. Invisible flood control in plain sight.
That's a small pond where we can store the rainwater. And if the water continues to come and across the road here, we have other ponds, which in the end is connected to the sea.
These little linked ponds are being built all across the city to hold excess water from rainfall. But it's not just ponds. Some projects are smaller but still hold water, like green roofs. Less noticeable are widespread climate inlets that look like ordinary drains but bigger and in areas with a higher risk. all based on a map Jan's team devised of how the city is likely to flood in a cloudburst event. Much of the 2 billion or so euros given to the water department is going 20 meters underground into the backbone of the project, the tunnel.
With this kind of dense urban area, you cannot solve the problem just with green solutions.
This is Jess Clausen-Kaas, who works for the city water department on a giant tunneling project.
You can do all sorts of things on the surface, and all this you can remove maybe 30, 50 millimeters of rain, but if you're getting 150 or 200 millimeters of rain, you need a big system to really transport water away. There's no way water can get into the harbor without making a tunnel like this.
The new tunnel network is 3 meters in diameter and runs for 18 kilometers across the city. The tunnels will carry water from the ponds and the roofs towards the harbor. But they serve another function for the rest of the year too. Water can be stored here instead of in the sewage system and slowly released into the harbor. That keeps the water quality in check, and so people in Copenhagen can swim in the harbor and the canal system through the year. And the tunnels step in again in a storm.
If you have a heavy storm where we start getting flooding in the streets, we just open it up and it can transport all the water through the pumping station into the harbor.
Okay.
So it will simply empty the streets. There will still be water in the streets. I mean, it's not completely dry, but we'll go from between half and 1 meter down to 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters maximum.
And how much water can this whole system deal with?
The amount of water that can be transported in the system is determined by the pump station you have at the end. And the pump can deliver 20 cubic meter per second. 20,000 liters per second, or however you will express it. And as soon as you have a storm alert and you start getting water in the streets, it will start and it will just keep emptying.
Many cities are in the process of measuring their own sponginess. Not every city has as much free space or is based near a coast. Some are much more dense and still developing. So many are calculating how to climate-proof themselves based on their own differing needs. Beijing, for example, has a water shortage problem, and its design relies on retaining water. China is actually leading the world with over 60 of its over 600 cities planning a redesign. Zhengzhou city allocated nearly 800 million euros to the project over 5 years and has built green roofs and rain gardens, but it still struggled with flooding in 2021 because it's not easy. The Indian cities of Chennai, Mumbai and Kochi are working against yearly flooding during the monsoon and water shortages for the rest of the year. The second part is not a problem where I am. Copenhagen has a really high water table, and so there's water everywhere. That's why I'm on a bus that's about... I'm on my way to an old park in the center of the city called Enghavenparken that integrates both green and grey infrastructure. This park works on 3 levels. The first is a rose garden, under which water from the surrounding areas is stored.
This storage can also function as a water resource during dry period for the park, to keep the park clean. If this storage tank is filled, we'll start filling the sports ground you see over here.
This is at a lower level than everything else, so it can receive water easily and be filled up as soon as the water starts to overflow, when it could look like this. And then there's the wall. When there is a massive cloudburst, a wall comes up here to close off this compound, and this thing behind me will turn into a giant basin that stores the water runoff. A few of the projects have been financed by taxpayer money, but most of the funding is linked to consumption through a levy on the water bill of homes and companies.
And if the cost explodes too much, then we'll say, okay, we don't do it, but then there might be some more damages locally. And you inform the citizen that they have to protect their buildings.
But even with this much investment, adaptation to changing rainfall can only go so far. Would this tunnel kind of be able to handle the worst case scenario in terms of flooding and storm water?
You have to decide what size of storm, and there will always be a storm that is bigger. That's it. So it's a probability, and there's a prediction of climate change and how often will this happen.
Yeah.
But there's always will be a rainfall that could be even bigger. So you're never protected 100%. But it gives a certain protection from a certain probability, and then you would lose so much. So your investment is compared to your risk of loss. And that's the size of investment we are making.
That might sound like resigned pragmatism, but Copenhagen's been implementing its cloudburst management plan for more than 10 years. Other cities are no doubt watching very closely, weighing up the cost of investing now to lower the loss and damages climate change is likely to bring around the world.
Cities and tech lovers are made for each other. New gadgets in the market every few weeks and easy access to all of them. Sounds exciting, right? But what's not as exciting is what we do with this e-waste that is generated. India was the third largest generator of e-waste in the world in 2019. And even though a majority of this comes from the cities, only 33% of this e-waste is recycled to some extent. And cities don't even have any plans of fixing this. But not anymore.
Electronic devices that have become obsolete. At Prashanth Omnakuttan's plant in Coimbatore, in the state of Tamil Nadu, he and his team take care of the appropriate recycling and disposal. Many users simply throw their old devices or even batteries into the normal trash, with dangerous consequences, says Prashanth.
Most people just throw away useless batteries in their garbage, thinking that they are small in size. But if 100,000 people did the same thing, it would be 100,000 batteries. If they reached the dump, they would pollute the groundwater, fertile land, and eventually infiltrate the products that are cultivated on the land. And if we consumed those products, it would be very harmful not only for human beings, but also for any livestock.
E-waste, like what's stored here, is among the fastest growing waste streams in India. According to the latest global e-waste monitor, more than 53 million tons of e-waste were disposed of worldwide in 2019. India accounted for more than 3 million tons, and the amount is set to increase. Because new products are coming to market all the time with shorter usage cycles, activists complain.
Each year, the demand for electronic devices increases. In years past, you could use an electronic product for at least 5 to 10 years. But nowadays, that's decreased to 1 year. That's the main reason for e-waste.
So what to do with the huge mountains of discarded appliances? At Prashanth Omnakuttan's plant, the team first sorts the e-waste by type, separating household appliances from consumer electronics. Another group takes care of all devices related to data processing.
Then there is the data destruction process. With IT electronics like desktops and laptops, there is going to be data. So part of our job is to destroy that data. Some products like desktops and laptops are refurbished.
The company processed 900 tons of e-waste last year. Prashanth Omnakuttan sells the recycled devices to retailers and wholesalers. Reuse is one way to ensure more sustainability. But it's not just entire devices that can be returned to the market, but also individual components or valuable raw materials.
Gold, silver. Some rare metals like gold, silver, platinum, and palladium are in high demand, but they are difficult to mine. So to meet this need, we do urban mining. That is, we extract those rare metals from waste products and get them back to the market. In this process, we get hazardous waste like lead, fluorescent lights, and CFLs. And we have processes to separate and dispose of all of these types of waste.
India has now tightened up regulations for manufacturers. Equipment now needs to have a longer shelf life. But specialist companies like Prashanth Omnakuttan's are essential for reducing today's mountains of electronic waste.
The Paris Agreement was all about cooling down the planet. And 8 years since the agreement, a lot has changed in cities across the world, including Paris itself. Many cities have seen unprecedented high temperatures, even heat waves, including a city like Paris that has been encased in concrete. But our reporter headed to the French capital to find out about its efforts of cooling down, cutting down CO2 emissions, and reducing air pollution.
Valentin Allais, is satisfied with this year's bean harvest on the biggest rooftop farm in Paris.
Beans. A whole load of them. Most people who come here are surprised. They say they don't feel like they're in the heart of Paris.
Paris is undergoing a transformation. Many are sick of the traffic jams and air pollution, which make the summers almost unbearable. The French capital is hoping to be climate neutral by 2050. So trees are being planted on public buildings and vertical forests are cropping up. Rooftops are turning into massive vegetable plantations. Not far from the Eiffel Tower, Valentin Allé's rooftop farm is the biggest of its kind in Europe. 1.5 hectares, or the equivalent of 2 soccer fields.
250 grams. Make sure you put the lid on properly.
The fruit and vegetables are delivered to a supermarket that's just 2 kilometers away. Short distances mean lower CO2 emissions. It's a win-win situation for the environment. But what about the quality of the produce?
I'm ambivalent because on the one hand, a good CO2 record because everything is close by, but on the other hand, it's a very polluted environment.
I have to admit I'm not that interested in produce that's been cultivated in the city. I prefer fruit and vegetables produced in the countryside, especially because Paris is very polluted.
The French Institute for Agricultural Research is hoping to dispel some of the doubts. On this roof, there are boxes for fruit trees and a piece of fallow land to test what grows here naturally. Christine Aubry and the Institute are looking for a way to promote urban agriculture. She thinks that the produce grown on Paris roofs is harmless.
Some German colleagues at the Berlin University discovered about 10 years ago that as soon as you pass the 3rd floor, you're no longer in the zone polluted by traffic.
She says these roof farms also have an educational function.
There are at least 3 or 4 generations of urbanites who don't have any education or direct contact with rural agriculture. So most of our children, grandchildren, don't know what cultivating a tomato or a salad entails.
That's why Franck Pontier rescued a vegetable farm in the middle of a typical concrete desert in the Paris suburbs.
How are you? Off you go to work? They're a bit shy.
He is less worried about air pollution than the contaminated ground, by heavy metals, for instance. But he's found a way of getting around this.
As the soil is broken up, the lead will sink in slowly, especially if I don't use any plants that would retain it. If I don't use spinach, lamb's lettuce, carrots, or beetroot that trap the lead, it will sink down.
He has planted edible flowers instead. He says that tests have shown that they have no lead residues, and chefs love them.
Just take a tiny little grain. It tastes like leeks. It's pretty incredible.
Many urban farmers are convinced that there are solutions to fight the problems that arise in an industrialized city. And the state is funding visionary projects and farms all over France. There are already over 300.
Not only in Paris, but in all the big cities of France and even Europe. There are more and more roofs being built. And many architects who are already thinking about how to use roofs for vegetation and create green roofs.
Valentin Allais and his colleagues are planning to double their rooftop space in Paris. This is where they see the economic and environmental future.
We thought our cities were developing and changing for the better. But turns out it got us into this literal, hot, polluted mess. But our cities are changing again, and this time around these changes actually do seem for the better. Only time will tell us. But you tell me, are any good changes happening in your city? I would love to know. You can email us or reach out to me directly on my social media. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Goodbye. Namaskar.